I knew something wasn't right from the moment he let out that sigh of relief. At first, I wasn't planning to attend my husband Daniel's annual company retreat. It was scheduled in the middle of the kids' school week at a mountain resort out east filled with cocktail hours and conversations about next quarter's targets. I said I would stay home. Daniel nodded a little too quickly. He said he understood, then turned away noticeably, almost unconsciously relieved. It was that relief that made me change my mind. I called my sister to watch the kids for the weekend, booked a ticket, and showed up Friday evening just as the welcome reception was starting. When Daniel saw me walk into the hotel lobby, his smile froze for half a second before settling into something polished and perfect. "You really came?" he asked, hugging me tighter than usual. I smiled back. "I'm a project manager. My job is to notice the small details before they turn into major problems." And within minutes I noticed her. Lena. 30 years old. A product designer who had recently transferred onto Daniel's team. She stood a little too close to him at the buffet table, laughed a little longer than necessary, leaned in when she spoke. Nothing obvious, but enough for me to start watching. I'm not the jealous type. 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage. You don't hold all that together if you panic every time your husband talks to another woman. Daniel works in tech. His team includes both men and women. I've never had a problem with that before. But Lena wasn't just talking to him. She was performing for him. Saturday morning, I went to a yoga class while Daniel played golf with his colleagues. In the afternoon, there were team-building activities. I noticed Lena always managed to place herself in the same group as Daniel. When he spoke, she looked at him as if they were the only 2 people in the room. When he laughed, she lightly touched his arm, just enough for others to notice, just subtle enough to deny. I stayed quiet. I watched. That evening by the pool, I heard Lena's voice rise above the crowd. She mentioned that Daniel had stayed up until 2 in the morning helping her with a project. Then she laughed and jokingly wondered whether his wife noticed how often he worked late. The group fell silent for a beat. I lifted my glass and smiled. "If you've ever felt something was off before you had proof, comment one." I set my wine glass down and walked toward her. Lena smiled when she saw me approaching. The smile was confident, almost challenging. Daniel stood a few steps away, his conversation slowing as he realized I was heading over. I kept my voice light. "I heard you stayed up until 2 in the morning helping Lena last week. I'm curious, which night was that? Wasn't that the same night our daughter had a fever?" I knew very well there had been no fever. Daniel froze. Lena blinked. She said it might have been Tuesday. Or maybe Wednesday. I nodded. "Tuesday, that's strange. You told me you were handling an issue on your own that night." The silence spread like ripples across water. Daniel quickly clarified that it had just been a few text messages. I tilted my head slightly. 2 in the morning is a long time for a work exchange. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Sometimes one well-timed question is enough to make the cracks begin to show. That night when the hotel room door closed, Daniel started explaining before I even asked. He said I had misunderstood, that Lena was just enthusiastic because she was new to the team, that everything was strictly work-related. I sat down on the edge of the bed. "I just want one number," I said. "How many messages have the 2 of you exchanged this week?" He gave a small laugh and said he hadn't counted. I looked at him. "More than 50. His silence answered for him. After a few seconds of hesitation, he handed me his phone. I opened the internal messaging app. 347 messages over 3 months. Most of them were about projects, design, drafts, deadlines. But woven between the professional lines were personal questions, complaints about her boyfriend, late-night texts just to say she missed the feeling of working with him. And then I read the line that made my chest feel heavy. Daniel had written that sometimes he felt like I didn't understand the pressure he was under. I took a screenshot, saved it to my phone, and said nothing more. The next morning I woke up earlier than Daniel. He still seemed to believe everything would settle down once we got home and talked in private. Maybe he thought I would choose silence to keep the peace. I chose differently. At breakfast, I approached Melissa, Daniel's direct manager. I asked if she had a few minutes to speak privately on the patio overlooking the lake. I didn't mention jealousy. I talked about professional boundaries. I talked about the risks of a manager exchanging frequent personal messages with a subordinate, especially when those messages could be misinterpreted. I showed her the screenshots. No emotional commentary, just facts. If Daniel were to evaluate Lena's performance later on, could this create a conflict of interest? If either of them ever felt uncomfortable or wronged, could the company face a complaint? Melissa listened for a long time. She said she would review everything carefully and handle it according to company policy. I wasn't trying to harm anyone. I simply refused to let things go any further. Sometimes protecting your family isn't about making a scene. It's about raising the issue exactly where it needs to be raised. On Monday morning after we were back home, Daniel received an unexpected meeting invite from Melissa and HR. He didn't say much before leaving, but I could see the tension in his eyes. That afternoon he came home looking pale. Lena was being transferred to another team. She would have to attend training on professional boundaries. Melissa had questioned him in detail about the messages. He looked at me for a long moment. "It was you, wasn't it?" I nodded. I spoke to Melissa. He said I could have just handled it privately with him. I reminded him that I had tried. He had handed me his phone but still hoped I would let it go. I didn't do it to make things harder for him. I did it to put everything back where it belonged. Sometimes consequences aren't loud, but they're enough to make everyone stop and think. If you believe professional boundaries should be respected, comment too. That night we sat across from each other at the dinner table, no one else in the room. Daniel said nothing physical had happened. He repeated it as if that sentence alone should be enough. I asked him a different question. "Did you want it too?" The silence stretched longer than I expected. Finally, he admitted he liked the attention. He liked having someone hang on to every idea he shared. He liked feeling interesting again, not just a busy father and a tired husband at the end of a workday. I didn't yell. I didn't leave the table. I told him clearly what would happen next. We would start marriage counseling this week. Full transparency with phones and messages. Nothing deleted. And in that counseling room he would tell the whole truth, no minimizing, no deflecting. I added that I had chosen to protect our family instead of turning everything into chaos. But if he didn't truly change, I would not keep shielding him. Daniel nodded. For the first time I saw that he understood the seriousness of what he had done. 6 months later, things aren't perfect, but they're different. Marriage counseling hasn't been easy. There were sessions when we could barely look at each other. There were moments when Daniel had to say out loud that he had been seeking validation elsewhere because at home he felt like he was just fulfilling responsibilities. Hearing that hurt, but it was necessary. I had to admit my part too. I was so focused on the kids' schedules, work, and the endless daily to-do lists that I forgot to ask myself what I needed. We started talking again from the ground up, not about bills or weekend plans but about emotions, pressure, fear. Daniel decided to leave the company. He said it was his choice. I supported it because some environments carry too many reminders. We're rebuilding one brick at a time, slowly but intentionally. If you believe a relationship can be saved when both people take responsibility, comment 3. A few weeks ago I ran into Lena at a cafe near the office. She saw me first. I could tell by the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her hand tightened around her paper cup as if she wanted to leave immediately. I said her name. Not loudly. Just enough to make her stop. I told her I didn't want to make things awkward. What I did back then wasn't meant to hurt her. I saw a situation heading in the wrong direction and I chose to step in before it caused bigger consequences for everyone involved. She said Daniel had left the company. I nodded. She had left as well. Things had become too heavy after the meetings and internal changes. I told her I didn't believe she had set out to break up a family. But when you seek validation from someone who is married, you need to understand where the boundaries are. And when you joke about that person's wife in front of a crowd, you're crossing a line. She held my gaze longer this time. There was no challenging smile anymore, just a thoughtful silence. When I left the cafe that day, I thought back to that night by the pool, the confident smile, the seemingly harmless joke Lena made. It had all started with something small, a glance that lingered too long, a text sent at midnight, a quiet sigh of relief. What I learned wasn't how to win a confrontation. It was how to stay calm when my emotions wanted to explode. Strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about knowing exactly what's happening and choosing the right moment to act. If you feel like something isn't right, don't rush to dismiss your intuition. Observe. Gather facts, have a direct conversation, and if necessary, raise the issue where it can be handled appropriately and with dignity. Our marriage is still being rebuilt day by day. Trust once cracked takes time to heal, but I know my worth. And I will never trade respect for silence. If this story made you reflect, share your thoughts in the comments and follow the channel so you don't miss the next videos.